Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in. We're really excited to dive into viral brand moments, turning crisis into connection. I will be your host today. My name is Daniella Sampson. I'm the head of marketing at Pendulum, and I'm joined by our director of content, Georgina Ford, who's going to share with us some really cool recent case studies of large brands and how they were able to take a pretty bad crisis and turn it into something actually quite positive, which is a rare feat to be able to accomplish. So let's talk about how we can turn crisis into connection. Our first case study is on Trader Joe's. Would love to pass it over to Georgina to talk about what happened here because the story is very polarizing on two separate ends.
So first in February, Trader Joe's issued a recall for millions of pounds of frozen chicken fried rice. Um, the recall was primarily driven by news reporting, so it started on news and it spread slowly from news into YouTube, TikTok, and into creator channels. Obviously, the sentiment around it was negative. There was fear. There was a lot of people wanting to check if their particular bag of fried rice potentially had glass in it. And it drove a lot of negative sentiment. The engagement was primarily negative, and it started on news channels. But at the same time, a completely opposite and creator-driven viral moment was happening with the Trader Joe's lavender tote bags. I'm not sure if you all know about them, but apparently every year they launch a new color and everybody needs one. So at the same time as this negative narrative about glass in food was this viral tote bag moment. And the negative sentiment there was not against Trader Joe's, it was that the bags were sold out. Everybody wanted one, everyone needed one. And that was driven entirely by creators on TikTok and YouTube and your visual channels. So it was very interesting, kind of polarizing moments where you had totally negative and totally positive happening at the same time. And I'm not sure if that was a deliberate comparison by Trader Joe's or two deliberate moments to polarize their audience, but it was definitely a very interesting case study.
Yeah, and I would say too, when you look at the dichotomy of this, right? So you're looking at potentially having glass in your rice. That seems like it would have swarmed everything through social channels. Like, oh no, is there glass in my pack of rice? Like, you would think that would be a viral moment on all social platforms. But somehow Trader Joe's evaded it. And the only thing people cared about online were these lavender tote bags, which I have not seen them at my Trader Joe's, so they must be sold out. But let's double click into the data just to see a little further where these conversations were happening. And again, to show how interesting it is if you're not tracking the full holistic picture of your brand, you may have only seen one side of this narrative and it might have shifted how they acted, right? But if you have full social intelligence, you're able to see what's happening where and how they're interconnected. So let's break down this data. Go ahead, Georgina.
So the recall carried 340% more mentions, primarily on news channels. So there was much lower engagement. People trust a creator, they trust a person. News is like background noise that people read. They don't necessarily interact with it. So that was the dichotomy in channels to start off with. The food recall, obviously a massive amount of mentions because it was a health and safety hazard. The spring tote launch, much fewer mentions. But if you look at the engagement and impression metrics, the lavender tote launch way eclipsed the glass shard narrative. Um, and the lavender tote bag was driven almost entirely by creators and individuals on the platform. People were describing the tote and showing it in their videos like, yay, I got one. There seemed to be a shortage of them, so there were a lot of people describing the tote and holding it up and being joyful.
It's interesting to hear too where influencers are placing their value, or at least in the case of Trader Joe's, right? Because we've seen in the current political landscape, influencers jump on certain things that are more serious. But when it came to this, for some reason, glass in their rice was not not clicky enough for people to really engage with it. And the lavender tote bag won out. So it really is a tale of two narratives and making sure the brand is capturing both. So when they're reporting out and their CEO is looking at this, they can see what impact it had and really what it did for their brand reputation. So now I'm excited to talk about the next case study. Are you ready to dive into the KitKat Easter heist?
Yes.
All right, so break down what happened here because it really did seem like an April Fool's joke, and I'm still waiting for them to say it was, but apparently right now it is not. So tell us what happened, Georgina.
So just before April Fools, 12 tons of Formula One car-shaped KitKat bars were stolen on a journey between Italy and Poland. So that is 413,793 KitKat bars. That's a lot of KitKat
That's a
bars.
lot of
That to
Kit
me
bars.
sounds like an April Fool's joke, right? And it
Yeah.
happened just before April Fools. And also just before Easter. So all the people that want their Kit Kat bars and wedged between April Fools. But apparently it was a real thing that happened. And what could have been a brand could have just ignored it or pretended it didn't happen or written a standard statement or like we've lost 413,000 bars of chocolate somewhere in Europe. They actually really leaned into it in a highly successful way. There was a very high velocity narrative around, they created a stolen KitKat tracker. So if you get one of those F1 bars, you can look at the barcode on the back and you can put it into the stolen KitKat tracker and see if you have one of these stolen bars. And it basically turned the world into detectives. And it was really something that created almost a community around this incident and made everybody feel part of it. Um, Creators all over the world were joining in on it, sharing the links, and there was 200% surge in positive sentiment. But it reflected sometimes as negative because we were talking about things being stolen and heists. But it was all people joining in and trying to find these stolen KitKat bars.
So I think what's interesting here is a lot of times if something like this happens, normally it's mum's the word or CEO puts out something that is just please allow the police to investigate at this time. And it's kind of that blanket PR statement and just like shut everything down. And when you have these were highly anticipated and they're an official partner of F1. So I'm sure there was a lot of things with the partnership too, to have the only F1 Kit Kat bars and 12 tons of them completely go missing. Not great for their partner stance with F1. There's a lot of things involved here, but I think what's interesting is whoever on their team is a genius, and who knows, maybe it was the intern that came up. Sometimes it comes from like the least assuming person. It's like, let's lean into this and rally behind it and actually make it gamified and fun, if you will, and make light of it. KitKat was even putting out jokes around like, I know we say take a break with KitKat. We didn't mean steal a whole truckload. So I think they knew they had to lean into it. They didn't want to have it be a negative narrative. So different approach, right, from Trader Joe's. And we don't know Trader Joe's, the lavender bag was released at the same time. It was probably coincidental, but with theirs, they didn't talk about the glass, right? In the right, like it was more the mum's the word traditional approach, and they were saved by the tote bag. Whereas KitKat is like, hey, let's get ahead of this and let's spin this narrative so that we can own it. And it really paid off. I mean, let's look at some of the numbers.
Interestingly, there was an almost the same amount of posts between news and individual creators for this one as well, because it is obviously a high news story, but it's also a community story. So it really got everybody involved in it. And it spread across all the traditional channels and the creator channels. So that was also a very interesting takeaway from this is just the spread of everybody getting engaged and the news story value of it and the individual value of it.
We also can see that TikTok is kind of dominating
Yeah.
the influencers on TikTok. Was there anything around did TikTok definitely reign supreme, or what was the story like on Instagram versus Facebook versus TikTok?
So TikTok dominated the total engagement with 3.1 million posts. Um, and there was a lot of things like Fast and Furious parody content on there.
I'm sure.
And things about the Easter Bunny getting his extra stash. Instagram captured the largest share of images and visually driven, with 7.1 million, largely driven by the KitKat stolen bar tracker. Um, then came X. So that was a primary hub for news and updates and corporate corporate roasting by other brands as well. And
Of
then
course, X, leave it to X to have
yeah.
the roasting cynical. Yep, that makes sense. That tracks.
And then Facebook, among the older demographics, focusing on the Easter supply shortage narrative.
The parents, right? The parents,
Mhm.
oh, what am I going to get my kids or my grandkids? So, yeah, I think that follows the stereotypical pattern of each of those platforms. One thing I wanted to ask too. So, a lot of times at Pendulum, we talk about the importance of monitoring fringe networks where crisis can brew. I know in this case, it's funny, the fringe networks, and correct me if I'm wrong, they really leaned into like tactical, how to find these Kit Kats and like
Yeah.
really not so much the fun, playful side of it, but like the we want to actually become detectives and figure this thing out logistically of how to steal 12 tons, where to put it.
Yeah.
Is that true? Is that the case?
Yeah, we saw particularly on Telegram, there were niche groups discussing the black market potential of stolen goods, for example. So it was very interesting seeing how each of those channels had almost their own narratives. And as we always say, it's niche groups are where stories start or where sentiment starts. So it's great to be able to have that visual into those niche channels and see what people are actually discussing in more of those niche communities.
Yeah, and even though overall the sentiment was positive, they're the epitome of turning the crisis into connection, but important for their internal teams to really look at how narratives were driven on each channel and
Mhm.
then maybe play into that accordingly or learn from it from next time of how to position things for different networks. So, really great to have the full snapshot. So I'd like to pivot now, and we saw two great examples of brands that somehow miraculously got out of these crises, maybe not fully unscathed for Trader Joe's, but pretty darn good when it comes to brand reputation fallout. So let's now look at some playbooks of the essentials of how other, companies, they might not have these big, robust PR teams to spin up things, or KitKat coming out with an app to scan barcodes. Not everyone has the budget to throw something like that together within 24 hours. So here are some things that smaller PR teams or smaller agencies can look at to do to help equip them with what they need for fighting a crisis. So the first thing we want to talk about today is really stop doing passive monitoring and move to active listening. So there's a lot of things that historically with social listening were true of how we looked at items. Maybe you logged into your social listening platform once in a while. You check on a few things or you set up old school alerts just in case your brand is just mentioned. But now we're moving to, a more intelligent way of social listening, and we call that social intelligence. Yeah. So first off, for passive monitoring, a lot of times you rely on mainstream channels. And we just broke down two great case studies where we saw, hey, only focusing on those gives you a very small snapshot of what your real story is. So not only do you need to monitor those mainstream, you have to look at those outlying fringe networks. So when you can look at a holistic view of all of these different channels, like Pendulum monitors 25 social channels, including those fringe networks and in multiple languages. That's where you're going to get a snapshot to see where a narrative's shifting. Also, crises tend to start bubbling up on those fringe networks first before they hit mainstream. Next is that surface level keyword tracking. So historically, you would say, okay, I want to track just this keyword, super surface level. Maybe it was just your brand name. And nowadays, people are talking on video, on podcasts. They don't always need to write your name out. And so you're missing those components. So moving to full spectrum visual and audio visibility is again going to capture so much more, especially because now I guarantee you a brand crisis does not start with a post where your name is added, unless we have, those trolls looking for a fight. But most of the time, it's going to be emerging in natural conversations that happen midway through a podcast. And if you don't have the social intelligence to find it, get the signal, and then come up with your game plan, you're going to have a crisis brewing by morning. Next is reacting to visible engagement. So instead of that, we want to move to setting smart alerts for niche signals. I think a lot of times social listening alerts have a really bad rep And rightfully so. I've been on the other side of them where you get these alerts and there's a person on X who mentioned your brand name and they have one follower and it's their mother. And you're like, this is not what I need to move things forward. This is not what I need. I don't want my CEO to be bothered with these alerts that really don't mean anything or are not gaining traction. So setting up things accordingly to make sure, hey, if it hits a certain threshold, if it comes from a certain watch list of influencers that you know when they post, things go viral. There's things like that you can start setting up to just be proactively defending your brand. And lastly, I would hope we're beyond the days of summarizing past brand noise and really moving toward decoding intent to drive connection. Great example is what we just talked about with KitKat, right? So they found the signal, they've realized how to quickly switch the narrative, take control of it, and transform the story instead of just reporting out, oh, yeah, this is what happened, a lot of negative, and not taking that proactive approach. Nowadays, consumers are demanding transparency. They're demanding you own up to things within like 24 hours. I would say even now it's probably within 12 hours when something happens. So if your initial PR strategy is just to stay silent for 48 hours, you're going to be in a pickle. So we've talked about this a little bit, but I want to dive more deeply into it, Georgina. We talk about fringe networks and dark social, but can you go a little bit deeper on it so people understand what we're really talking about?
So something like 95% of consumer sharing happens on private channels, WhatsApp, text messages, things like that you cannot access. We cannot access, no one's allowed to, there's rules around it. You cannot access private data. But what happens is people in those communities, those channels, may take a screenshot and they share them on those niche channels. And that's where it's essential to have that visibility into Telegram, Reddit, BitChute, those kind of channels, so you can see those emerging narratives. So, for example, if it's a complaint about a brand, maybe it goes on to Telegram. And if you have the visibility into Telegram, you can see that incubating before it goes all the way to TikTok, YouTube, and goes viral. So that visibility right at the beginning, it's the seed of the story before it happens.
Yeah.
Um, and it gives brands more time to look at that and fix the problem before it grows.
Almost like fix the problem before it becomes a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Okay, so last but not least, something that's super important. It's something that I've seen start to happen over the past few years is breaking down team silos. We always talk about that, but sometimes it's not put into the lens of stopping a crisis, right? A lot of times crisis sits with the brand security team or the PR team, and you don't think of a brand crisis as creating this brand intelligence framework. And so think about this, all right? So there is that off mention, right? Or that off audio capture that the social team spots. Then it needs to be passed over to the social analysts. They're the ones that set up the monitoring, the watch list. They're actively looking at social listening every single day. They're the ones who can help build out, okay, here's everything that's presenting in the full social landscape. How do we want to respond? And now that goes to the PR team who's going to draft that response plan. Or, hey, here's A, B, C, and D. So you can be really prepared. Now, this might sound, before I get into the marketing team as well, like, whoa, this is a lot. If I'm a smaller company, this seems like overkill. But it's like, as soon as you implement this process, it makes everybody on the same page. Everyone understands how to operate. And then it doesn't need to be a fire drill when one of these things happen. It's just like, oh, social team, pass it to the social analyst. PR team, you're ready. You probably now, after already implementing this process, know, is this a tier one crisis, tier two, those pieces. And then the marketing team knows how they would adjust their creative or their strategies in real time. That's putting brand intelligence to work. It's taking everything and being able to move within an hour. And unfortunately, that's where we are with today and how fast consumers run and how fast everything evolves on social media. Something can spiral out of control overnight. So if you don't have this brand intelligence framework, you are leaving yourself open and vulnerable to something coming in quickly, especially for those larger enterprise brands. So just to recap, if you want to tackle PR crisis head on, or you want to make sure you're building a proactive strategy for 2026 and beyond, you need to navigate from traditional old school social listening to a place of social intelligence and build that brand intelligence framework. So you're going to go beyond passive social monitoring, which is, what we've done up until this point, to real strategic brand intelligence that finds the signal on these patterns before it turns into a crisis, right? That's always the goal. Catch it before it hits. Next, you're going to start tracking those fringe networks. Those are the ones that a lot of times like, well, the volume's not as high. Do I really need to track those? And it's like, yes, that's where those niche communities live and things start to brew, and then it spills over to mainstream. And then lastly, you're going to develop that brand wide unified strategy and reporting framework so that you can build success together. Everyone is on the same team. So, if something does arise, you guys can tackle it. You can spin it like KitKat did. You can have a plan and lean into the channels where positive engagement is, like Trader Joe's did, and hopefully save yourself from that bad crisis and turn it into a real connective moment for you and your customers. So I want to thank you all for listening to our webinar today. Georgina, thank you for the deep data dives. It's been really fun to look at. And we hope you stay tuned for our next, where we dive into the next viral brand moment.